Hello and good morning. This is Jim Hussey, and thank you for taking the time to join Johnathan and I today. I'm the author of the Survival Guide to SaaS Optimization, and also glad to share that I'm the founder of the Institute for the Advancement of SaaS Governance and Optimization Best Practices. It's certainly a mouthful, but our goal there is to provide to the community insight to help them make decisions. I'm joined today by Johnathan Bell, who is COO and co-founder of License One. And I think you're going to have a great conversation and an enjoyable conversation to listen in on today, because as you'll hear, Johnathan is a Scotchman living in Paris. So welcome, Johnathan, and if you could please take a moment to introduce yourself and a little bit about License One.
Sure. So thanks for having me, Jim, first of all. A little bit about me and License One. We're a little bit further from Paris. We're in a little coastal town called La Rochelle on the west coast of France. And a bit of background, well, I've been working in SMEs, primarily SaaS startups themselves. Kind of ironic that I fell into SaaS management. I became part of the problem, then tried to become part of the solution by launching a SaaS company. So looks how hypocritical that I am. And it's now been more or less a year and a half that I've started License One with me and my two co-founders. We're now 4 or 5 people working on the project full time, primarily serving clients that are also SMEs within the European region. We don't really have anybody in the US yet.
Well, great. Well, I'm sure that'll be coming. So yeah, it's wonderful. We have so many leaders, visionaries like yourself, who actually saw a problem. When they were running a company, in particular a software or a high growth agile type of or digital organization, they see this problem emerging. And in parallel to this, as I've mentioned to you, I'm in the process of conducting a research study on SaaS optimization best practices, and I can't help but sneak in and look at the results, even though it's not finalized yet. And of course, what we're seeing is discovery. The function of discovery is so critical. It is by far the number one criteria by which SaaS management platforms are being evaluated. So can you talk a little bit about License One and your approach to this important area?
For discovery, sure. So I mentioned a little bit in the intro, but the way that License One is positioning itself on the market is primarily towards SMEs and probably towards the smaller end of SMEs. So if anybody's got more than 250, 300 employees, they're probably better suited with, a Xylo, a Blissfully, a Beanie, if I shout out the French, the French market. I'm more about co-opetition than competition. And because of that, that really impacts how we act on the discovery end of the spectrum of SaaS management. Because where you start to see an enterprise, the majority of people that are looking to discover SaaS applications for those type of companies, well, you need an integration with Microsoft 365, Office 365, and you need to be looking at Azure Active Directory. Whereas License One, we're more focused on the Google ecosystem and the Google Workspace ecosystem, which tends to be more popular with these smaller companies. And we're also integrating with European bank account to detect those transactions and also the billing cycle, so that then we can detect, for example, your renewal dates and the amount of spend that is linked to that. So in summary, our two sources at the moment are Google and bank accounts, so your financial data.
Well, interesting approach. I think what's going to be very interesting to watch for License One is, you're targeting a high growth segment, right? So 250, 300 employees today, in 18 months, 2 years, could be 1,000. So it's going to be interesting to see, and even based on, I've been spending a lot of time with Better Cloud's recent research study, State of SaaS Ops, and they're talking about how these organizations it's part of their DNA, right? Is the SaaS stack, managing the architecture, file share, and all that. So it's going to be interesting to see how you migrate and grow with your account base as they grow.
Yeah. And I mean, I think this is probably going to have to be one of the things where we're really careful with our product direction and our vision, because the type of people we speak to day in, day out, tend not to be the type of people that I read about when I'm looking at other actors in the market and their marketing materials. So for example, I hear a lot about, and also, and by the way, I'll take the time to plug your book, but also, but also in the Survival Guide to SaaS Optimization, we hear a lot of SaaS, PaaS, IaaS. When you're in those big enterprises, you have somebody dedicated, or at least somebody who's knowledgeable about the distinction between those three categories. The people we speak to, they don't know the difference. They're just thinking, okay, well, I'm subscribed to something, I pay each month, I access it through a navigator, it must all fall into the same category. And so for our product vision, we really need to be careful that we don't go too much in the direction of these big accounts, at least not initially, because if we do, I think we're going to really lose our core base of users who, in my opinion, shouldn't be asked to think about what they want to do. For me, I think you mentioned in your book, it's like you cannot optimize what you cannot govern. And for SMEs, I think you cannot govern that which is not simple. And at the base of everything we try to do, we try to remove all jargon, everything that's really hard to get set up and optimized, and all of the different custom features that you need when you're a large company and you've got multiple subsidiaries. Our real core business doesn't really focus on those type of customers. We're more of a plug and play, hand-holding, as little hand-holding as possible, because we want the software to be as intuitive as possible. And we want everybody in the company to understand what the hell that means. Because if you speak to Deborah in HR, she doesn't care about SSO, she doesn't care about ITAM, but she's still implicated in the process of SaaS management. You're never going to get her as an ambassador in your process if the software you provide her with intimidates her. And it's going to be the same with the finance director in the SME. It's going to be the same with the sales manager. And if we start using too many complicated terms, we're going to lose them before we even get the time to make the argument of what the value add would be by implementing such a thing in SMEs processes.
Johnathan, I love the focus, and as you rightly say, is the book that I put out, and thank you so much for the purchase. You caught me off guard there, but
someone's got to pitch it, by the way.
It is funny. Is my granddaughter carries around the book here, pretends it's a school book, but the interesting thing is I can't help it. My background is enterprise, right? Yeah. So I come from a large enterprise, and we had to deal with the issues around SaaS governance. And for us, it was governance. It really wasn't optimization, because we had full teams that were going to deal with Salesforce and Microsoft and the others. But what's happening, what's going to be interesting is as those organizations adopt more of a robust SaaS optimization strategy, really the core thing is getting the functions to come together to discuss how the hell are we going to manage this long tail of SaaS applications. I would think in an organization of 250 to 300, those conversations still happen, but they just happen more rapidly, and you're able to solution more quickly. Yeah. Right. And so that's what I suspect. Is that what you see in that range of organization?
Yeah, I mean, the motto that we hear come up again and again for our buyer segment of 150 employees all the way up to 300 is move hard and break things. Do something first, ask for forgiveness afterwards. And it's this agility that kind of get lost when you put in those formal processes that we tend to see in larger enterprises that just isn't really sellable for an SME, because they have maybe 12 months, 24 months of liquidity. They don't have time or the energy to put in a really rigorous process if they're going to have to dedicate weeks or months of training people internally, setting up the software, et cetera, et cetera. So no, I completely agree. This is exactly what we're seeing with SMEs.
Yeah, I love the liquidity thing, because when you look at the reality of burn rate, right? So you've got to begin to generate that revenue. You got to begin operationally to perform. So yeah, I can absolutely see the urgency, let's say, of a rapid implementation, easy access to the data, and intelligence to make the right decisions.
Yeah, I think this is also coincides with the fact that when you're in an SME, the majority of people are wearing multiple hats at the same time. It's very rare that you get one person that's focused on doing one micro job. You know, the finance director is also sometimes setting up computers. I've even worked with SMEs where it's the CEO installing Slack on a computer, and they're still working at this process of, we will not recruit until it's crucial to the business, because finance is the blocking point for the growth of the company.
Right.
Whereas when we get to large enterprises, I think you've got way more experience than I have in that sort of sector. But when we start questioning spend of 2,000-3,000 euros per month on a software, that's just a rounding error on the balance sheet.
Sure. So Johnathan, so as we look forward over the next 12, 18 months, well, what do you see happening with the License One platform? What do you see kind of happening in your target market? What are the issues and challenges they'll be leveraging with or fighting with? Okay,
that's a great question. I'll break it into two parts in my response. For License One, our big objective is to add a compliance element that simplifies all of that for our SMEs, because again, we're coming from this European context, which I'm fairly sure over the next 2 or 3, probably a bit more longer term to get into the Anglo-Saxon countries. But I'm fairly sure that this data sensitive approach of consent before processing and before reselling is going to become more and more common. It's going to become more and more rigorous, and also at a governmental level, is going to be implemented. Even in the US, we have some acts, I think, from California, the Californian Data Protection Act. In Europe, we've got GDPR. It's something we hear time and time again when we're speaking with our SMEs. Already, they have the problem of having to put in the little cookie consent bot. But when you go into an SME today and you ask them, okay, who is subtrading? So which SaaS do you store your customer data on? How long is their storage period? Where is that data stored? And what data exactly is stored in that software? Is it the first name, last name, or are you storing the gender, the sexuality of the person, which needs to be encrypted? And then you start losing them because they're very aware that they don't do that. They're just playing this balance of risk or reward of, will I get a control from the Data Protection Authority in my country? And right now the processes aren't quite at the standard where they're able to control all of the SMEs. Or will I just do that and prioritize it later when we become a big enough company that will matter? So and one element, that's where License One is going to be heading towards in the next 12 months or so. And I also think that's where the market, if by market, are we talking SMEs or are we talking SaaS management market with your question?
I was referring to a little more generic, but again, the SME or the small medium enterprise is the right thing to speak to.
Okay, so for the SMEs, I think we're starting to see more and more of in Europe is where, let's see, 2 or 3 years ago, nobody knew what the hell a cookie was. I think even in the US, nobody understood. Even today, to some people, they think it's a tracker, which, the definition is really hard to tie down with a lot of people. Now people understand what the hell, what does this do? Why is that sensible for me? And then we've had this Cambridge Analytica scandal. It's more for the consumer end of the business, but SMEs, especially towards the lower end, tend to buy based on the same sort of criteria as your average consumer. They tend to have a higher pricing, a lower pricing elasticity on buying a SaaS management platform. Also, they tend to be sensitive, especially in France and Germany, particularly, on what people are doing with data. And I think this is, for SMEs, progressively, especially in the industries that we're targeting. So we're targeting IT communications, we're targeting media and journalists, and we're targeting professional services, so your lawyers and your accountants. Those are type of industries where if you make one wrong move with your data protection, that could mean all the bad press in the world and your business is dead tomorrow.
You're done.
We're already starting to see the European Commission and local countries getting a bit more up to date with how they can automate the processes of controlling and auditing all of these SMEs. That it's making small noise. It's making a little bit of a wave. I think we're just waiting for a tsunami to really come over European companies and say, okay, now we need to actually structure what we're doing with data, how we inform our end users of what's happening with it, and how if somebody wants their data deleted from all of our SaaS platforms, where we know where to go and how to delete them. And I think that's something that is just impossible to do today. If you find a company that can do that, I'm really interested because I haven't found a way that is possible. You have Segment that does it with an integration, but it's not integrated to every platform. You also have the problem with SMEs that often they're not paying for the enterprise tier software, so they don't have access to the API or to the what's it called, the provisioning access to that software. So you're also like compounding all these different problems on the vast majority of your sector and the vast majority of economy,
Right.
based themselves on SMEs.
So question for you is, as you were talking, and you know, it is, as I mentioned, I have a fair amount of gray hair, and I did spend a portion of my publishing career here in the US. I was publisher of a magazine called Small Business Computing. So we were squarely focused on the small and medium enterprises. And so it's fun to revisit all of those issues. And again, that was quite quite some time back. But one of the things that you know, in conversation and what I'm observing, even with the large enterprises, is the need to manage renewals effectively. You know, and when I was just thinking in your world, in the small and medium enterprises, you know, there's services emerging around SaaS renewals and, you know, getting more of a pricing and terms and conditions that these organizations just don't have the internal expertise to do. Is that an area that you know, License One may play in, or is that an area where you may partner up with some organizations that do that type of service, because it involves, you know, manpower in the back office to be able to produce that?
Oh, for sure. You're right. We have, what is it, Vendor and Sastrify, I think they're out of Germany or Sweden. Those guys are doing a great job. I think for us, it would probably be a false move to go into that sort of service too early. Like you're saying, it's going to take an incredible amount of investment, but also on our side, we need to train internally, because we don't do that habitually for our clients. I think for us, at least for the immediate future, we're focusing on giving those type of companies, your vendors and your Sastrify, access to License One for their clients only when the client authorizes it. Right. To have that sort of mapping of what they're paying, who they're paying for, to speed up the process. But for the negotiation element, I don't really see that being something we go into. But for the renewal date management, I think you're very right in saying that it's something that is concerning for a lot of SMEs, because when you're subscribing for, let's say, 50, 100 employees to Slack, but Slack's a bad example because Slack are rather ethical in their pricing. But let's say, I'm not going to name a company now, I've mentioned ethical, I don't want a lawsuit on my head. But let's imagine 12 months later, you have your SaaS that renews automatically. That's the aim of the game. You have your automatic renewals, but the problem is you're engaged for 12 months and nobody's alerted you because the person that was the billing owner before has left the company. And now you have 12,000 euros of debt in effect because you're not going to actually use that. And when cash is king in an SME, that is something that you can't go to sleep easily with, knowing that you have no idea of what's renewing, when it's renewing, how much it's going to cost. And am I actually using that? Or if I'm not using it personally, are the employees that are supposed to be using it actually using it? Because if I'm going to renew, and that was pretty much the genesis of License One, is our first, let's say, guinea pig user had a Zoom subscription and a Join Me subscription at the same time. Except from the Join Me subscription, nobody had a clue what was happening. The accountant's role in the company was just to log in and collect the factors, invoices, because that's their role. They're not supposed to be questioning. Some do, but they're supposed to just be saying, okay, we paid that much. I have the proof. My job is done. The person that was assigned to it left the company, so there was nobody to question, do you still use it? 36,000 euros over the space of 2 years, wasted spend. And when you're making annual revenue of, let's say, 6 early 7 figures, that's something that you don't like to start your morning with, nor your week, nor your month, or even your quarter.
Right, because as we know in the world of SaaS, you may have found one, but there's probably a dozen doing the same thing.
Yeah. And SaaS companies aren't making it easier either, because you've got companies that are adding features that sort of kind of compete with other ones. You have like a Notion that has your internal wiki, which could compete with Google Workspace, but it doesn't entirely replace it. And then there's this whole sort of gray area where you really, it's a time-intensive role to say, okay, are we getting the most out of A or B?
Right.
It's impossible for us in terms of code to be able to define that. And that's where, yeah, a company like Vendor or Sestrify are really good at doing their
So
job.
what you're describing for those of us that come out of the large enterprises is the classic, tools, right? Well, we need a new tool. We need a tool for that, in the battle. But hey, Johnathan, this has been a pleasure. I think you and I could end up speaking all day long, and unfortunately, I need to bring it to a close. I know you're busy, so thank you so much. I'm very excited for License One. I think I love your focus. I love, the staying true to your mission, and I think that is going to serve you very, very well in the coming days, months, and years.
Thank you very much, Jim. Thanks for your time, and I'm happy to have had a part in
All right.
this evolutionary series.
All right. Have a great evening.
You too now. Bye-bye.